And we'll get started. So basically, what I'm going to do today is just basically show how to go through setting up Visual Studio Code so that you can do some editing and sort of go over an overview of what you can do with it and what's possible. And we're not going to go into all the details, but we're going to try and get to as much as we can. So let me just get set up here. Everybody see my screen okay? Hopefully. All right. And I'm sure you can hear me all okay. All right. So, what is Visual Studio Code? Well, when they first started working with Visual Studio Code, it was pretty basic stuff. You couldn't do a whole lot with it. And my biggest mistake I made when I started working with it was I was treating it like every other editor, like Notepad or something like that. And that's really not the way to work with Visual Studio Code. It's really not a simple Notepad replacement. It's much more than that, and it's really designed to open up entire directories instead of just a single file at a time. So it's really that's the way you have to go about thinking about how to make it work, and that's the best way to make it work. So just give me a few minutes here to rearrange a few things on my screen so I can see what I'm doing. And let's see here. All right. All right. So first thing is, where do you go to get Visual Studio Code? I know, I figured I'd start at the very beginning. So the place you want to go is to the website for Visual Studio Code. A lot of times, you know, we keep talking about Visual Studio so much that we forget to put the code on the end. But if you go to look up Visual Studio Code, there is a code.visualstudio.com website. You go there and you can download the different versions. So what does it run on? Well, it runs on everything pretty much. Windows, Mac, and Linux. There's 64 and 32-bit versions of it. You can get either one. I'm pretty sure I download all these, the 64-bit version, but you can get whichever one you want. It's pretty small, and that's the other nice thing about it is it's small, it's lightweight. You can even put it on a USB key and run it that way if you wanted to. So what you want to do is you want to go in and download it whenever you get a chance and install it. It's a pretty quick install. And let it go from there. Now, there are other versions of it, so you can get the insider's build if you wanted to. So if you want to stay on the bleeding edge of things, you can do that. If you download this one, you will get updates fairly frequently for the system, for Visual Studio Code. And you can run them side by side. I usually have both the regular one and the insiders running at the same time. And it gives you a heads up as to what's coming. Sometimes, you know, they announce new things and it's only in the insiders version, so you can try it out there if you wanted to. So, so that's basically how it works. Oh, before I forget, they are going to have a Visual Studio Code Day, and that, let's see, I can find that. Yes, Code Day. So that will be January 27th, so it's coming up soon. And you can sign up, and it's free, obviously. And here are some times. and they have a few keynotes and things. So it should be interesting to find out both what's coming and how to do certain things. You got some tips and tricks in here. I'm sure there's going to be a talk on how to do extensions, which we'll get into a little later, things like that. So basically, that's what's coming down the pike. There you go. All right, so, how do you start up Visual Studio Code? Well, I usually, when I install it, you get options. You can install it so that it's part of the right-click on File Explorer. So I just right-clicked on this folder. I went down in here, and there's an Open with Code, and there's the Insiders version. I usually put them both on there. So you can open things up that way. What a lot of people do is they just type code dot. Dot's important because that says, hey, open up this current directory inside of Visual Studio Code. So, by the way, if there's any questions, just speak up, and hopefully I'll hear you. So when you start up like this, what it's going to do is it's going to open up Visual Studio Code in this directory here. And I just happen to have a directory sitting around that was that I was playing around with. So here is just a directory full of stuff. It's got subdirectories in here, you can see. So there's a little explorer that you can work with. There is basically just a little viewer of all your different files, and you can open them up and take a look and see what's going on with it. So there's that. There's other commands you can run from within Visual Studio, or from the command line for Visual Studio Code. So it's got a diff in it. So let's see, I think I have, let's see, there's a README there, and there's probably a docs and stuff like that. Let's see what else we got here. There's a couple of READMEs. There's one inside the docs, right? Yeah. So if I, let's just copy something, make it life easier for me. I'm going to take copy from docs. Oh, well, that didn't work, did it? Yeah, well, don't worry about it. Oh, well, helps if you use doing too many things and too many different operating systems here, but there we go. All right. So I now have two files. One's README, one's README new. I can do a diff on this by entering a command. So there's a diff command. So I can say, well, give me readme.md and readme new.md and start up a new window. That's what the N stands for. And so I can use that as my diff tool if I wanted to. And it'll open up both files. And it's thinking about it, so I'm not sure why it didn't give me the diff, but there should be a diff. Oh, that's because I entered the command wrong. Silly me. Don't save. Yeah. They tried to open up 3 files. So there we go. All right. Why are you giving me a hard time? Because let me do it right. There we go. Finally. So they're 2 files. They had nothing to do with each other. So it gives me a diff of the 2 different files, which is not bad. So you can see, what's different between the 2. If they were obviously, if you were using this inside your Git repo for doing diffs, you could use it this way. If you wanted to, you can use it as your git diff command if you wanted to. So there's some other interesting things. You can actually go to startup and say, I want to go to a specific line or file or something like that. let's say I want to go to the 5th line and the 45th column. I can do that, and it should open up. Problem this morning because he hasn't enough coffee. So now I'm sitting at the 5th line. There is no 45th column in there, so it only got that far. But if I go, let's say, 7th line would probably be a better one to try. I can go to 7th line, 45th column, and the cursor will be right there, which is at the 7th line, 45th column. So you can do things like that. Interesting stuff. So there's more commands like that you can enter in from the command line. For the most part, most people just do a code period, and they get started working with things that way. So now we have the screen here. Let's take a quick look and just go over the basics of what we've got here. So what we have the menu across the top, which is fairly obvious. Down the left-hand side here is the activity bar. That's this bar over here with all the different icons on it. There's a sidebar, which is, I don't know why they call these things this. What this is, this down here at the very bottom is the sidebar. You can put that on the left or the right-hand side if you wanted to. The rest of this is called the status bar, obviously. And these are the editor groups. Now, it says editor groups because you can have more than one file being edited at a time. So you can drag a file and move it someplace else if you wanted to and put it over on the side. So now we have 2 editing groups here. So you can do things like that. Pretty interesting stuff. So that's the basic of it. There's tabs across the top. And some of the things that are on the right-hand side here, I will go over a little later. They're part of the extensions that I have set up. And if you notice, there is a little map on the right-hand side, which you can turn on and off if you wanted to. So there's that. Now, there's a lot of commands you can enter in. It's not evident when you first start working with this how you enter in commands. To me, it's a little bit on the you sort of have to be in the know kind of thing when you first get started with this. So Control-Shift-P gets you to the command palette. And here are all the commands you can enter in. And the nice thing about it is, not only do they give you the commands, but they also give you the shortcut keys that you can use. So if you wanted to, you could enter in these commands. You can type them in. So if you were looking for just Git commands, you can start typing Git, and you get the Git commands. And then you can either select them or you can just continue typing. And then they always have this little bar, this little gear over here, and that's for setting up a shortcut key if you wanted to. So if I wanted to have a shortcut key for this, I could click on this and I could add in a shortcut key if I wanted to. You can do that with all the commands. Obviously, you don't want to reuse existing ones, so you want to be careful about what you're doing when you're entering these commands in. But basically, that's how you can make things easier and better for you. And speaking of shortcut keys, there is a shortcut key to get to all the shortcut keys, and that's Control KS rather, and that will open up the shortcut window, which is this guy here. So let me just close that and open it back up again. Control KS. Let me get rid of that. So here are all the shortcut keys. So it's built into the editor. You can find out what it is that you may want to do. And you can see that there are a lot of them. Now, the source has to do with, is it part of the built-in system that is part of Visual Studio, or is it an extension that we've added in? And again, I'll get to extensions momentarily. The other important thing to know is how to get into settings. And there's a couple different ways to get into settings. So my go-to is usually down here. There's a little gear at the bottom left-hand side, and there's settings, or Control comma will get you to settings, or you can go File, Preferences, Settings. So there's a couple different ways to get there. Control comma is probably the quickest way. So I go into settings with the Control comma. You can see it gives you a nice little editor to work with. The original version of Visual Studio Code didn't have this editor. You were working strictly in the JSON file that is the settings file. So all the settings are stored in a JSON file, and you can go in and edit them directly, or you can use this to do some of the editing. When you first open up settings, it gives you the commonly used one. So most people want to turn on or off autosave. Autosave, one of the things people keep forgetting about in Visual Studio Code is that because it doesn't work exactly like Visual Studio, where when you run things, it automatically saves all your changes before it starts to run. Visual Studio Code doesn't do that, so you have to actually save things intentionally, and this allows you to turn on or off an auto save, and you can have it after the delay or whenever you change the focus, or that kind of thing. I don't have it turned on usually by default, unless I'm doing a lot of things where I keep forgetting to save it, and then I'll just come in here and turn it back on again. But that's a useful one. The other ones most people change are the font size and the font family. And then there's tab sizes, things like that. The other things you can go into over here on the left, you can go into text editor changes. So if you just want to change some of the text editing functions, you can come in here and do that. The mini map, you can turn that on or off, put it how big you want to make it, that kind of thing. There's a workbench settings for if you're working with multiple files or multiple projects. The window, what the color scheme should be, that kind of stuff, features, applications, and extensions. So extensions are where the extensions put their settings. So overall, it's pretty easy to work with in here. And there is this sync option. If you have multiple machines that you run Visual Studio Code on, you can turn on sync, and then whenever you open up Visual Studio Code on any of your machines, it will get the settings that you prefer. Other things that it can do, I personally like to change my fonts, because I like to have ligatures, and this does support ligatures. If you don't know what a ligature is, if we just open up a new file, if I type equals greater than, it turns it into an arrow. Let me go back to settings for a second and look for zoom. This is a good one to know about. I'm going to zoom it up to 2. How's that? There you go. That's probably a little easier for everybody to see. So, as I said, if this changes certain characters like greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, whatever, into different into symbols that are a little nicer when you're doing text editing for programming. I find it a little easier to work with this way. Some people don't. It's totally configurable. So it just, to me, it makes it a little easier to read the screen, and it makes it easier for me to understand what's going on. So, but yes, it does support all this stuff, and in the settings, This particular font, Fire code, I don't never know how to pronounce it. That one does support ligatures, so you can, if you use that one, you have to download it. You can find it online if you want to. If you want to see what's actually happening behind the scenes, so here's some of the JSON settings, and it shows you right here where this settings file is. So by default, what it does, it only puts in things that you've made changes to. Otherwise, it would get, you would have to go through the entire JSON file just to find out what you've made changes for. So here are the changes I've made. I've got the editor font family, which I've made changes to. I've got font ligatures, which you can configure. And there's some other things that I have set up in here as well. And you can see this is the last one we just put in. I could change this to a 1 and then save the file, and it would change it immediately. Save the file and changes it back. So you can play with the settings this way. You can play with the settings this way, whatever makes your life easier. Okay, so let's get into, let's look down this list of things over here on the left-hand side. So this is your file explorer. By the way, it toggles it on or off. You can also resize it if you want to, if you think it's too big. So this is the explorer. You can see all your files. This is a search and replace. This is the Git location. This is to run and debug things. And this one is a remote explorer. I have WSL turned on and it's running and everything else, so I can go in and look at my Ubuntu files if I wanted to and open things up that way. Here are a couple of extensions I've got installed, and this guy here is the extension manager. Okay, so here are the things that I've currently have installed on my system. This one is the most important one if you're going to do development work with C#. This one is the one that gives you a lot of the functionality that Visual Studio has, and it puts it into Visual Studio Code. So if you're going to do any kind of development work with C#, you definitely want to have this one installed. If you don't have it installed, Visual Studio Code is smart enough to see that you're opening up a Visual Studio or a C# file, and it will offer to download it for you and get it in there. Let's see, what else have I got here that's interesting? Well, you know, something that I should have, and I don't have in here. Let's see. I usually like to have this guy turned on. So if you want to install something, you just go out and you can search for it in this search box up here at the top. So this is going out and it's showing me that I don't have this one installed right now because I can install it. So I click on the install, it'll install it. And I like these icons a little bit better. So that's what I usually like to do. This is giving me a little notice down here. I want to activate it. Yes, thank you very much. So there it is. Now, if I come back over here, we can see that my, what used to just be a little arrows now show up as actually file folders. It also understands a few other icons that I am more used to seeing. So there's a couple different Visual Studio icons out there, plugins, and there is some that is built into Visual Studio Code as well. But this is the one I like to use. And I just turned it off. There we go. That's the one I want. Okay. So easy enough to work with. There's a couple other extensions which we'll go into a little later. And then there's some other stuff down here. This is for accounts. So if you want to have your sync settings, remember I had that sync, the settings earlier. If you want to have that turned on, you really need to log in to GitHub, basically, is the best way to do that. And then you can turn on sync settings, and I think it uses GitHub for some of that stuff. And then there's this down here at the bottom, which is basically just a little quick thing. You can check for updates, turn on sync settings, a few other functionality settings, things that you can do really quickly here, including things like color themes. So if you want a different color, if you prefer, Visual Studio look of things, there it is. To me, that's a little bit too bright for me, but so there's that. The default dark one for me is just fine. So are there any questions so far? Nothing. All right. So let's go in and actually try and create a console application from scratch, and we will try and get it to run, debug it, that kind of stuff. Okay. No, I don't want to save anything. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to create a new folder inside of the command line. This is, let's call this Philly.net CodeCamp. Or better yet, let's call it something a little easier to work with, because this would be better. Oh, well, there you go. Get rid of that first. Yes. Okay. All right. So we have a Hello World folder here, and now what we're going to do is we're going to create a console application using the .NET commands. So before we do that, though, we're going to start up Visual Studio. There was something I want to show you inside of that, and do it that way. So again, we're going to do a code dot that opens up the current directory into Visual Studio, and notice we don't have anything in our directory. Let's close that for a second. So we have no folders in here, right? There's something that you can do in Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, that I really like, that is much more difficult to do in Visual Studio, and that is to open up a terminal window. And there's a couple different ways to open up the terminal window. You can come here and do View Terminal, or Control Backtick, which is the most common way I do it, is just to do a Control Backtick. And what you'll see is it opens up, for right now, a PowerShell terminal window down at the bottom of the screen. It's just regular PowerShell. It opens it up in the same directory that I opened up the project in, so it understands where it is. So I can do commands. There's nothing here, so obviously I'm not going to show it. Nothing going to show up, but it's just a straight terminal window that works as you would expect it to. So what we're going to do is, from within Visual Studio Code, inside the terminal window, we're going to create a console application. And this is how you would do it, because there aren't any templates that are part of Visual Studio Code like there are in Visual Studio. So in Visual Studio, you'd say open new project, and you'd specify what kind you want to do. And all that's really doing behind the scenes are these .NET commands. So what we're going to do is we're going to start up a .NET console application, and it's going to go out and it's going to create one for us. And you can see on the left-hand side as these things pop up over here. Okay. So there we go. So I've got a project file and I've got a program file. Okay. I can run the app right from here. If I do a .NET run, that should run my application. And there it goes. Isn't that wonderful? Compiled it, ran it, the whole thing. Also notice it added a couple more directories up here with bin and stuff like that. So also notice that this bin directory has nothing underneath in the bin directory itself. There's a bin directory, and underneath that there's a debug directory, and underneath that there's a net50 directory. So the way it shows it to you is this way. So it says, well, the bin is the top level, but there's nothing in it. And then there's a debug, but there's nothing in that either. And the only thing you really see is when you get all the way down to .NET or to Net 5.0. So that's the only, we're going to show it to you that way, rather than have you have to open everything up all the way down. So that's just the nice thing it does for you. All right, so let's take a look at this program file, which is just a straight program file, no big deal. And if we wait for a minute or two, see if we get our extensions to pop up. So it said what it was doing was it was activating the extension, and then you get this little pop-up down here. It says required assets to build and debug are missing from Hello World. Add them. Well, yes, we want to add them in. So if you pay attention up here in the File Explorer, if I say yes, what happens is it creates this little VS Code, .VS Code folder. And that'll be important to us. Notice that we get our little code lens things happening down here. Obviously, there's no references that this isn't referenced anywhere. This isn't referenced anywhere, but we get the code lens showing up anyway, right? So that stuff works pretty well. And we do have IntelliSense and some other things in here as well. So one of the things, I don't know if you noticed or not, it does take it sometimes a while for these to notice that you need these files to do the debugging. If I said no to that, I wouldn't be able to do some of the debugging stuff. But the next time I opened up the application inside of Visual Studio Code, it would go through the process again. Say, hey, you don't have everything you need to do, debugging and things. So it would offer to add that back in again, which is a nice little thing it does for you. All right. Let's see if it did anything over here. No. Okay. So we should be all set to start working with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do a few editing things in here. We're going to make a few changes to the program just to give us a little more than just hello world. So if I Control A and Control KF for format, it will format the file just like Control KD does in Visual Studio. This is Control KF. Probably a more logical one since the F would be format. So anyway, we just want to set up a quick little program for us here. You can see as I hover over things that stuff pops up. And again, this is part of the IntelliSense and other things that would be that come with this extension, this guy right here. It is the important one that you want to have running and available to you. And you can tell it's working because if you come down here to the bottom, there's an OmniSharp server running, and that's really what's doing all that IntelliSense and some other things. It's actually just calling out to that and doing the work. So that's how this stuff works. All right, so if we just do another .NET run down here, we can run it, and it's going to come up, and it's going to ask us for, whatever the application wants us to do. Oh, and again, this is, remember when I was talking about the autosave stuff? we just ran this and it didn't do the new stuff. It did the old one. Why did it do the old one? Because I haven't saved this file yet. And I can tell I haven't saved the file yet because see this little dot up here? This guy says, hey, there's a change here and you haven't saved it. If I come over here and open editors, it does say one unsaved. It has the same stuff over here. So I have the option to leave this open. I usually do have this open if I have multiple files I'm working on. And I can save all right from here, or I can do Control S and it will save it. Once it's saved, if we run it now, we should get our new application running. So what's your name? My name's Rob. And it says, hello, Rob, and it sets the date and time. And that's basically what this program is doing. It's nothing special. Okay, so at this point, what we probably want to do is start debugging things. So we can do that. We can set breakpoints, just like you can in Visual Studio. That works. But there's a few more things we have to do with this one. It's not out of the box understanding exactly what we want to do, which is where these Visual Studio Code files come into play. Okay, so if we look at the launch file, this is what's going to happen when we try and do a debugging session. And it's going to build the application, and it already understands, where it's going and what's going on with it. And it's going to attach the debugger to it. The one downside to this is a console application that requires console input. And by default, it sets the console to be the internal console. You say, well, what is the internal console? Isn't that the terminal? And no, it's not. The internal console is the debug console. It's this guy right here. It's not the terminal. So what would happen is it would go and open up the debug console, but wouldn't let us add anything or type anything into the terminal window. So in order to fix that, we have to change this to integrated terminal. And then we can save it. Now, something else to notice down here, you can have multiple configurations, just like you can multiple configurations in Visual Studio. You can do it here as well. It just adds more configurations to this file. We won't do that right now, but it's available to you if you want to do that. All right, so now we've got this. We want to try and debug the program. So instead of coming down here and doing a .NET run like we were doing before, we're going to use this guy over here. And this is the run command that's going to go out and run. So when you click on this, you notice a few things show up. We now have a whole bunch of different stuff on the left-hand side here. We've got a list of variables, which aren't any yet because we're not running, some watch variables, what the call stack is, and we've got our list of breakpoints. And right now we have one breakpoint. It's on line 12. So at the top here is the actual starting of the debugging session. This implies that it's going to actually run it. It doesn't. All it does is set you up to run it. It just opens up the screen or the sidebar that has all the stuff in it for running and debugging. So if we go ahead here and click on the run, what's going to happen is it's going to go down. It's going to build our stuff. And then if you notice, it jumped over to the debug console because that's the default location for debugging stuff. So what we don't have that you would have in Visual Studio is we have all those screens down at the bottom. We can rearrange them and they're all in separate places. This only has one thing at the bottom, which includes our terminal, the output, any problems, and the debug console. So let's go back to our program for a second here. And why are we stopped at that spot? Oh, that's because we are stopped and it's waiting for us to enter in. It's doing this read line at the moment. So we go back over to terminal, we can see what is your name. So if I type in Rob, and let it go. And you can, it's just got similar functionality to, that was probably a bad thing to do there. Huh? All right. So now you can see what line we're sitting at. We're sitting at the breakpoint that we set. And what you can see over here is we've got a bunch of variables set up. So there's a string variable, which is this guy. It's the array that is args. So that's the args variable. We didn't pass in any args, so we've got the string that is name. That's what I entered in my name into. And we've got a date time that is also set. The other thing we can do is we can hover over just like you can in Visual Studio. You can see the contents. This shows you the contents. This I find very nice in that you can open up these objects and get a better look and to see what's inside it. I like that a lot. And you can also make changes. So there's a couple different ways you can change the variables. You can change the variables by going back to the Debug Console, which you can think of as a combination Debug Console and the immediate window. And I could say name equals Bill. Sorry, name equals Bill. Helps if you use the right quotes. All right, so and if you notice up here, it switches it right to Bill. Okay. I can also come up here and make a change. And I can put in here Mel. And then I'll change it to Mel. And if I come down here and type name by itself, it'll show me what the contents are. So there you have options on how you want to debug things, whatever's easiest for you. Personally, I like to just make changes up here, but sometimes this gets too complicated or too complex, and there's too many variables. Right now, this is a pretty simple one. So working down here is a little easier when you have a whole bunch of stuff and you don't want to go searching for what you're looking for up in this list. So that's pretty cool. You can also, if you wanted to, you could run an actual C# command. So if we do parse and we'll do 2021, do 1, we'll do 31. We'll just do that. Universal time. So I can do this kind of stuff. It's going to set it to January 31st, 2021, 5 a.m. And why 5 a.m.? Because I set it to universal time, which we are 5 hours off of. So that's why I set it to 5, right? That's pretty cool. So that's pretty neat. We can do that. And then we can, up here, we've got a little bar. We can continue on. So I say, all right, let's continue. Let it go. And then if we go back over to the terminal window, we could say hello, Mel, and it has the wrong time because we just changed that, and we're good. So that's how you can do some debugging. You can also do some conditional debugging if you wanted to, just like you can in inside of Visual Studio. So if I set my breakpoint and I say, well, I only want to break if the person put in a string that is null or empty, right? Name. So I can do that. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a little equal sign inside the breakpoint. It also, when I hover over it, shows me what the breakpoint is set for. And if I were to run it now and go back to the terminal, if I just put in a name like Rob, it just finishes up and continues on. If, on the other hand, I run it and don't put anything in there, We running? So you have to hit any key to exit. There you go. Put nothing in there this time, and just hit enter. What will happen is it'll hit the breakpoint, and it will let me make changes to it. So if I wanted to, I could put in here something else, Tom. I don't know, and let it go, and it runs, and it says hello, Tom. Isn't that nothing? So let's see. The other things you can do in here when you're doing debugging, it works just like Visual Studio, where you can have a step into, step over. So F10, F11, they work the same way. F5 works the same way. All those things work the way you'd expect them to work. Something I want to show you in the launch, there is an args setting here. So if I wanted to put args in here, I could. So I could put in here some. All right, and then let's save this. And if I run this now, and I'm going to have to put nothing in here so that it hits the breakpoint. You can see that my args now has things set. So some args got put in there. So that's the other way to work with this stuff. So any questions? We're just about out of time. So one of the things, since we got a couple minutes here and nobody's saying anything, one of the things I really like or encourage you to do if you're working with Git or GitHub or any of those things, this guy here, Git Lens, which they've moved, is really, really a good thing to have. It gives you a whole bunch of extras, including, let's see, if we open up one of these guys here, it's not going to be there. Let's see, we have commits. I can go back, I can look at commits. Whatever. I have file history. That's all in here. And the nice thing is up here, I can go backwards and forwards through the different commits and see what got changed, which is very useful. I probably should let this run through, shouldn't I? Yes. Okay. So that's cool. What else does it have? This is a different extension that I also use. So between Git Lens and this View Git Graph, it really is a very nice, nice little setting I have here that lets me see what is changed inside my project, and I can jump around to different commit numbers and that kind of stuff. What I find is I've used a bunch of different Git utilities and programs, and this can pretty much do almost everything I want it to do. As far as Git goes, there are a ton of extensions for different things. This one just happens to be Git. There are extensions for, if you're working with AWS, there's extensions for that. There's Azure extensions. There are, you can see there's a whole bunch of different ones here. These allow me to do remoting into WSL. This REST client is also one of my favorites. This allows me to issue REST calls, just like you would do if you were using Postman, except that you can do it inside of Visual Studio. What's nice about that is it's really easy to include examples of your REST calls inside your Git repository by just saving the files. There's a whole bunch of different extensions that are extremely useful. The Docker one is very good to have as well. There's Kubernetes one, debugging in Firefox. There are a whole bunch of different extensions By default, it shows you the installed ones and the recommended ones, but there are a ton of them. If I look for Azure, here are all the Azure extensions that refer to, that have Azure in the name. I think that I saw a Terraform. That's also another useful one if you do that kind of stuff. There are so many extensions available inside of this thing. So with that, let me stop sharing. And there we go. Back over here. And are there any questions? I see some questions here. Sorry, couldn't do. I don't know if there's better plans for multi-screen utilization for the future, but you know they might talk about that at that conference they're going to have. So there's that. You guys can talk if you want to when you ask the questions. I don't have any problem with that. So that was a pretty quick flyby of everything that should get you started to working with this stuff. Let's see. You can start up Visual Studio Code right from WSL. If you're if you like to work in WSL, that's Windows Subsystem for Linux. For those who don't know, so if you run Ubuntu on your system, which is what I have here, a lot of times I will just do my editing right from the Ubuntu screen. I just issue the exact same command, code dot. It starts up Visual Studio Code and lets me start working. And it understands the Linux line endings and those things. That's pretty cool. Any other questions? Oh, somebody's got their hands. You can talk. I won't, you know. Go ahead. I don't know what your name is. GIM 501. Yeah. Is that Jim? Do you have a question?
Wait a minute.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about when you would use code and when you'd use Visual Studio?
Sure. I usually have both open at the same time when I'm doing my work. If I want to, so what we do where I'm working now is we have a lot of build scripts that are in Cake, and we have a lot of Terraform. And all those things are sitting at the root of the projects. And when you're in Visual Studio, it's really difficult to get back to those and take a look at them. So what I'll do is I'll run both at the same time. And when I want to work on the Cake scripts, I use it Visual Studio code. And if I want to work on just my code, I work in Visual Studio. And there's no problem with them running at the same time and working with the same files. So that's usually when I do more of the Visual Studio code work. If I'm doing JavaScript, TypeScript, Cake, Terraform, those kind of things, almost always in Visual Studio Code. It's just easier and it's smaller. If I want to take a quick look at the code, I can do it there as well. And the other nice thing about Visual Studio Code is if I stick it on a USB key, I can, and I can take it anywhere, and it's got all my settings the way I like to have it. So that's nice too. But you can use it for everything if you wanted to. I know Visual Studio Community Edition is one of those things that makes it so that this seems a little overkill. But the other nice thing is it works on multiple platforms, including Linux. So there's that. So that answer your question, I hope?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Our time is pretty much up. I hope you had a good time. Hope you learned something. And go on to the next one. I'll talk to you later.